What we're fixing to see here, this is March the 3rd, 2021, in regards to the January 6th insurrection that happened up at the Capitol. What you're fixing to see here is the National Guard guardian, the head of it, describing the weird memo that come into play January the 5th that puts people at question towards, is this and was this an actual inside job coming not just from the citizens of the United States towards trying to overthrow the United States government, but is this and was this pertaining to something that was going on fundamentally in higher levels of government? If you'll listen to the way that Mr. Walker here explains it, you will understand, you will get a deeper picture towards somebody that was trying to tie somebody's hands in not being able to properly do their job in regards to the January 6th uprising. Please listen. It's actually disturbing.
After that 149 call, I alerted the U.S. Army senior leadership of the request. The approval for Chief Son's request would eventually come from the acting Secretary of Defense and be relayed to me by Army senior leaders at 5:08 p.m., about 3 hours and 19 minutes later. I had already had guardsmen on buses at the Armory ready to move to the Capitol. Consequently, at 5:20 p.m., less than 20 minutes, the District of Columbia National Guard arrived at the Capitol and were being sworn in by the United States Capitol Police. We helped to establish the security perimeter at the east side of the Capitol to facilitate the resumption of the joint session of Congress. In conclusion, I am grateful for the guardsmen from the 53 states and territories who supported the District of Columbia National Guard Operation Capitol Response and helped to ensure a peaceful transition of power on January 20th. In particular, I am grateful for the timely assistance from our close neighbors from Virginia, Delaware, and Maryland National Guard, who augmented D.C. National Guard forces in establishing the security perimeter. I'm honored to lead these citizens, soldiers, and airmen. These are your constituents, many of whom left behind their families, careers, their education, their businesses, to help ensure the protection and safety of the United States Capitol and those who serve in it every day. Thank you for the opportunity to brief you today, and thank you for your continued support of the National Guard. I look forward to any questions you may have. Thank you again.
Thank you, General Walker. Thank you for your testimony. And again, I know I speak on behalf of everybody in this joint committee room that we fully support the men and women of the National Guard and appreciate your work on that day and continue to appreciate the service you're providing to your country and protecting the Capitol as well as our country. So thank you again. General Walker, I want to start my questioning by going back in time a little bit prior to the events on January 6th. So my question is, in June of 2020, as violence was escalating during the summer protest, were you able to immediately receive approval from the Secretary of the Army and the Secretary of Defense to deploy National Guard to assist law enforcement at that time?
Senator Peters, I was. Yes, sir. The Secretary of the Army was with me for most of that week. He came to the Armory. I was in constant communication with him when we were not together.
Okay. What he just asked him was a legitimate question. It come back with a legitimate answer. Yes, sir. We was. Now listen to the answer that he gives pertaining to what happened the day before January the 6th of the insurrection.
So you were immediately able to receive approval in June of 20. From your testimony, I want to be clear. Were you able to immediately receive approval from the Secretary of the Army and the Secretary of Defense to deploy the National Guard on January 6th?
No, sir.
No, sir. Now listen to what he says.
In your opening remarks, you said that a January 5th memo was unusual. Could you explain to the committee why it was unusual And what was the impact of the memo that you received on January 5th?
Now listen to this. This is where you have to start scratching your head in understanding that there had to be some sort of reason why this weird or unusual memo come to this particular officer's existence January the 5th, a day before the insurrection, a day before the uprising. Listen to this.
So the memo was unusual in that it required me to seek authorization from the Secretary of the Army and the Secretary of Defense to essentially even protect my guardsmen.
Now, prior to that, 6 months prior to that, of the events that was going on throughout the land, he didn't have to do that. He didn't have to go before the Secretary of Defense. But for some reason, he's getting this memo that's telling him that he must do this before being able to protect his own people.
So no civil disturbance equipment could be authorized unless it came from the Secretary of Defense. Now, the Secretary of the Army, to his credit, did tell me that I could have force protection equipment with the guardsmen. So we did have helmets, shin guards, vest. We did have that with us, but that came from the Secretary of the Army. The Secretary of Defense told me I needed his permission to escalate to have that kind of protection.
6 months before that, he didn't have to have that Secretary of Defense of approval. So why all of a sudden questioning of the fact that he had to have the approval? Which leads others to believe that something was going on with upper levels of government at this particular time.
That kind of protection, even though you would be engaged in force protection, that to protect your men and women, before you could do that, you would have to get approval from the Secretary of Defense?
The memo from the Secretary of Defense made clear that I needed his permission to have, so what it says, without my personal authorization, the District of Columbia National Guard is not authorized the following: to be issued weapons, ammunition, bayonets, batons, or ballistic protection equipment such as helmets and body armor. Now, again, to be clear, the Secretary of the Army told me to go ahead and issue that equipment. So we never were going to have weapons or ammunition, and we no longer have bayonets. But we do have ballistic protection equipment, helmets, body armor. And so I did have that with each guardsman.
Thank you, General. So, but that was unusual, as you mentioned, to have that kind of request. You were on the January 6th phone call at 2:30 that we heard in from our previous hearing, where the chief of Capitol Police was making an urgent appeal for help. And we heard that the D.C. Metro Police Chief said it was a tepid response. He was shocked by it. What happened on that call? What was your recollection of the call, and were the assessment of the two individuals I mentioned, was that your assessment as well?
Yes, sir. So that call came in. It was we actually helped facilitated the deputy mayor from the District of Columbia and Dr. Rodriguez, Chief Conte, Chief's son later joined the conversation, and we dialed in the senior leadership of the U.S. Army. And at that time, Chief Conte and Chief's son passionately pleaded for District of Columbia National Guard to get to the Capitol with all deliberate speed. So the Army senior leaders did not think that it looked good. It would be a good optic. They further stated that it could incite the crowd. So their best military advice would be to the Secretary of the Army, who could not get on the call. So we wanted the Secretary of the Army to join the call, but he was not available. We were told that he was with the Secretary of Defense and not available. But the Army senior leadership expressed to Chief Conte, Chief's son, Dr. Mitchell, the deputy mayor, and others on the call, that it would not be their best military advice to have uniformed guardsmen on the Capitol.
So during the call, you're saying that optics was raised on that call specifically. So I want to go back to the question I started. You said that you were able to get immediate authorization in the summer of 2020 during those protests. General Walker, was the issue of optics ever brought up by Army leadership when the D.C. National Guard was deployed during the summer of 2020? Was that discussed?
It was never discussed the week of June. It was never discussed July 4th when we were supporting the city. It was never discussed August 28th when we supported the city.
Did you think that was unusual?
I did.
So let's put in context. You in your opening statements, you mentioned the National Guard troops that were ready to go. You had them back at the Armory. How many folks were in the Armory ready to go once the order was given, and at what time were they ready to go?
So I had them ready to go shortly after the phone call. So I brought, at 1500, I directed that the quick reaction force that was based at Andrews Air Force Base leave the base, get to the Armory at all deliberate speed. I had a police escort, bring them to the Armory. They returned to the Armory in about 20 minutes. So we had them sitting there waiting. And then in anticipation of a green light, a go, we put guardsmen on buses. We brought them inside the Armory so nobody would see them putting on the equipment and getting on the buses. And then we just waited to get the approval. And that's why we were able to get to the Capitol in about 18 minutes.
What time were they on the buses ready to go? Do you recall?
Before 5 o'clock. But at 5 o'clock, I decided, hey, there's got to be an approval coming. So get on the buses, get the equipment on, get on the buses and just wait. And then a few minutes after that, we did get the approval. I was on a secure video conference when the Army leadership conveyed to me that the Secretary of Defense had authorized the employment of the National Guard at the Capitol. So my timeline has 1708, 5:08 p.m. is when we wrote down that we had approval, and that was about 8 people in the office with me when I got that.
How many guardsmen were ready? You said right immediately earlier in the afternoon.
About 155.
So you could have sent 155 much earlier. What would have been the impact of sending those 155 right around that 2 o'clock time frame?
Well, based on my experience with the summer, and I have 19 years, I have 39 years in the National Guard. I was in the Florida Guard, Hurricane Andrew. I've been involved in civil disturbances. So I believe that number could have made a difference. We could have helped extend the perimeter and help push back the crowd.
Ms. Sanborn and Ms.
In other words, because of that time delay, it jeopardized the safety of lives inside the Capitol. That's what he's trying to say here.
Ms. Lova, last week we heard from former law enforcement officials who stated that a lack of intelligence reporting was the main reason for Capitol Police not being fully prepared for the January 6th attack. My question to both of you, yes or no, would you agree that the intelligence community failed to sufficiently identify the threat and warn the Capitol Police of a plot to breach the Capitol, that a plot that was planned in public and announced in advance in a number of open sources?
Absolutely.
I think this is on. I'll start. I wouldn't necessarily categorize it that way, sir, but I will tell you, I think you've heard us say before, there's not an agent that wouldn't want more tools in their toolbox. There's not an analyst that wouldn't want more intelligence. And I think I just paint a quick picture for you. The challenges we're faced are the immense amount of rhetoric out there. And what we're trying to separate is aspirational from intent, and combine in order to get to that intent. We're really thinking about private communications and oftentimes encryption. And so I would say that what we are faced with is the challenge of the amount of data, and then really trying to find, because of the volume and because of private communications, intent that then would have given us the intelligence picture potentially to shed light on what some of the plans and intentions, indicators and warnings, as our military folks might say.
Ms. Lova, quickly, please.
I will defer to you, Senator, your colleagues, and other oversight entities such as this one to actually determine what went wrong on January 6th. I don't feel I'm empowered or have enough information to declare whether or not this is an intelligence failure. I do know, however, it was not a success, and we will do everything we can to make sure that what we know is better distributed and understood by our partners. And to echo the Bureau's point, we will also do more to better understand how we can identify the next steps that we see in social media with this particular threat.
I've said all along, what has occurred here from a psychological standpoint is that everything was leading up into this point pertaining to the Louisville, Kentucky protesting, pertaining to the Portland, Oregon protesting, pertaining to what went on in other cities in 2020, because of whatever reason, that all this was jimmying up. I'm going to use the word jimmying up, hyping up this ordeal that happened January the 6th. But in another aspect of it, psychologically speaking, it was kind of like the story of the boy crying wolf. Help, 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 help. And then once you get there, there's no need for the help. I truly believe that the majority of the American people seen the potential towards what was going to unveil January the 6th. But in actuality, they didn't believe it because A, we have never faced anything like that before, and B, they had become so calloused of hearing the little boy cry, wolf, 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 help, help, help. In actuality, we just thought it was another false deception going out towards help, help, help. And basically what went on there for several minutes is that people couldn't actually believe what they were seeing. Now you're going from an event of help, 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 psychologically speaking, of people being burnt out, to the point that now things is unveiling themselves right in front of your very eyes, similar towards what happened during 9/11, similar towards what happened during the 51-day siege down in Waco, Texas. And now you've reached a pivotal point in your own personal minds to the point that this isn't happening. This isn't real. This cannot be happening. I couldn't tell you the amount of people that I talked to during and shortly of after 9/11, including myself, that for the first 30 minutes was questioning whether or not it was fake on some sort of Hollywood script that they was playing out towards wanting to bring this type of craziness into everybody's thoughts and everybody's appearance, similar towards what happened with the George Orwell broadcast whenever the aliens come down, and suddenly all of a sudden the person that was in behind the speaker had miraculously gotten the majority of everybody's attention, because at that point in time people actually was believing that we was being invaded by aliens. It's hard to put it in just one particular word towards what actually happened January the 6th. But there was failure of communications from our military. But what even added insult to misery was that the leader himself, the chief and commander, was the one that was basically egging it on, or planting the entrapment, or using a strategy that the Bible talks about not to do pertaining to putting a stumbling block in front of people so that they'll fall for it. And it was just, it was so unprecedented and unreal that people could not actually come to their senses in the right time frame that they should have come to their senses in whenever it was all unfolding. And it wasn't until, give or take, about 45 minutes into it, that's whenever the Capitol Police and Homeland Security took the initiative towards gathering up the people inside the Capitol building. This was after doors had been broken into, windows had been broken, people was being hurt, is whenever they gathered up the people and said, my God, this is really happening. We're going to have to seek shelter. Run for your lives. But of course, whenever you're entrapped in a bubble, whenever you're entrapped in sort of like a bowl, it's kind of hard to run for your lives whenever you ain't got nowhere to run. We have the chief and commander at the time, Donald John Trump, to blame for this type of environment that he himself created due to the fact that he was like a spoiled child that was throwing a tantrum because Biden had won the election. We was dealing with an individual that could not accept the fact that he himself had been beaten. We was dealing with an individual that for some reason was beyond reason whenever it come to accepting global environmental changes towards a crisis and being a environmental denier, a climate denier. We was dealing with an individual that had basically created this environment or this stumbling block that now others had become a victim of. And I use the same type of analogy towards what went on in Mount Carmel on the 51-day standoff. Some people may say, well, that's a poor example. Well, I don't think it was. Because whenever you had a group of ATF agents that moved in across the road from the compound there in Mount Carmel in front of the Davidians, the Branch Davidians, being disguised as a bunch of high school kids that was going to college, but the whole time they was running surveillance on what was going on across the street with high-powered equipment. And at the same time, they was butting up with this group of people and then leading them into buying guns that they never should have bought to begin with because they was high advanced military guns. The same type of armory that was sold across the border at the Rio Grande pertaining to the Fast and Furious. Whenever you have this type of a stumbling block being created by ATF, and then all of a sudden ATF's going to bust them because they didn't pay taxes. But on top of that, ATF lost the benefit of the doubt pertaining to coming in beyond their unannounced event. In other words, the surprise of attack had already been busted, but they went ahead and pursued it anyway. It was on the same level of what happened to the Davidians towards being led, kind of like a bunch of sheep being led to slaughter. They was being led of an intentional act of a stumbling block or an intentional act of entrapment. The exact same thing happened on a different level, in a different way, pertaining to Donald Trump and the event that happened January the 6th. That's the only way that I have of expressing it and explaining it to where it makes sense to not only myself, but it will make sense to others that has viewed it and looked at it and knows both cases. You have to know both cases, inside and out, in understanding what actually happened in the event of Mount Carmel, 1993, of the Waco, 51-day Waco standoff. And you have to understand the intent. Once more, you got to go to the intent here. You have to go to the motive of what created this atmosphere to begin with that was directly involved with Donald John Trump. Just like the intent towards bringing mass destruction to those people's lives at Waco began with the ATF. They intended. It was a self-conscious intent. Because they could have stopped David Koresh down in Waco probably over 100 different times towards him leaving the compound and going to places like Lowe's or going to other places that if they was going to cut off the head of the snake, they could have easily done it without destroying the whole compound. Their intent, their motive was to bring glory to themselves as they brought destruction to the Davidians. And of course, we see what happened on the 51st day of the standoff. They brought the Davidians down. But it was so shameful that they didn't publicly get their glory. But privately, whenever they had their corrupt courts, then is whenever they got their glory, because instead of people being punished, they actually got promoted. And I'm just wondering if the same thing is going to occur pertaining to the January 6th event. Instead of people being punished like Donald Trump and people underneath Donald Trump that was fully aware that this was happening, that was fully aware of the dangers of this happening, but yet and all, they failed in their dereliction of duty towards taking care of the people inside the Capitol. I'm wondering today if the very same analogy is going to take place pertaining to pardoning or promoting or rewarding people that should be punished. If the same type of analogy is going to happen today in 2021, January the 6th, of that in which what occurred in 1993 down in Mount Carmel, Waco, Texas. I'm scratching my head. I'm looking at this very hard. I'm understanding these testimonies. I'm listening to these officers talk. I'm taking in for granted of what I actually seen and heard, not only from the president, but from other people. You know, whenever you have all these red flags or these red lights going up coming from the CIA during the impeachment Ukraine trials and hearings, whenever the CIA tells you that all these red lights are going up, all these red flags are going up, and no one was willing to pay any attention, it's like had we become so calloused, similar towards the little boy crying, wolf, wolf, help, help. Had we become so calloused that we was not taking in the severity of what actually could have occurred January the 6th, 2020. It's kind of the same way towards whenever we was children growing up back in the 60s and 70s, those who are older like myself. Whenever you heard of somebody dying in a neighborhood or some sort of a slaying a mass slaying of some sort. We was just breathtaking. We was taken back by that as we was growing up in our teens and throughout our 20s and 30s. But then as we become more callous to it, then bigger events started happening, such as the Orlando massacre or the Las Vegas massacre or other massacres that's either happened with church people worshiping God or school children or people being engaged in some sort of activity like a theater event that happened in Colorado. And as we become callous to this, it's like, well, it takes just a little bit more, kind of like the frog in the theory of the frog in the boiling water theory, that if you gradually turn the burner up slower and slower each time, the frog actually don't realize that he's dying, that the water has become so hot that he basically is going to lie in the water until it actually kills him. That's what I believe has happened here. And if the truth be known, several people needs to be held accountable for not properly seeing the red flags or seeing the red lights going up, beginning with the impeachment trials that happened in the early states of 2020. Of course, we all had the coronavirus on our minds. We all had other things going on that was unusual that we had to deal with here in the general public. But that does not give an excuse towards our professional, proper authorities, law enforcement as well as military. That does not excuse them from not properly doing and handling the jobs that we have paid them to do.
We have to do a much better job, and I'm sure this will be explored in depth in questioning from my colleagues here. Chairwoman Klobuchar.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I want to start by asking you the same questions I asked our witnesses last week, and that is that based on what you know now, including the recent Justice Department indictments, do you agree there is clear evidence that supports the conclusion that there was those who planned and coordinated the attack on the Capitol on January 6th? Does everyone agree with that? Yes, no?
We are seeing indications from our charging documents of people that coalesced together before and made some plans.
Okay, so everyone is a yes on this? Do someone want to say if they're a no? I don't want to call on everyone. Are you all a yes?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Then would you agree that it involved white supremacy?
See, so now we go from it being done unintentionally. We have taken it from a different level, from it being done unintentionally towards it being done intentionally. Listen to what the senator and how she presents the question at hand here. Once more, listen to it. Let's back it up. Back it up. Back it up. Back it up. Stop.
We are seeing indications from our charging documents of people that coalesced together before and made some plans.
Okay.
Coalesced together and made some plans. This was not done unintentionally. This was not done ignorantly. This was done intentionally. Intentionally, this was done. It's really sad. And how a government has basically turned upon to itself. That within the government itself is starting to consume itself. The same way what happened to Rome. Rome wasn't destroyed from the outside in. Rome was destroyed from the inside in.
So everyone is a yes on this? Do someone want to say if they're a no? I don't want to call on everyone. Are you all a yes?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
See, they're all afraid right there at that point in time that they're going to incriminate themselves by saying yes, even though they know the answer is yes. It was done by certain individuals consciously and intentionally towards this insurrection.
Okay. Then would you agree that it involved white supremacists and extremist groups, the planning? Is everyone a yes on that?
And I might just say that we're seeing a wide range of involvement and still a lot left to be identified, right? A lot of these...
No, does it involve white supremacists? And that's what I'm asking.
Some.
Extremist group.
Some.
And was the event not planned by Antifa?
At this point, we have not identified a specific individual that we've charged associating or self-identifying with Antifa.
Okay, thank you. And would you all agree that what happened was a highly dangerous situation that had the potential to be much worse if it wasn't for the heroic actions of the frontline officers?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you. All right. General Walker, I'm going to start with you. I wasn't going to start here, but I am after what I just heard. So Chief Conte had said that he was stunned at the response from the Department of the Army when former Police Chief Sund requested assistance from the Guard. What's your reaction to what Conte said? Were you frustrated on that call as well?
Yes, I was. Senator Gorbachev, I was frustrated. I was just as stunned as everybody else on the call.
And I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, that with the National Guard, it is much better to prepare them and call them into action and have a plan, which I know that I heard from Mr. Selesnis that people tried to do. They called the chief, they called people and said, you want to have the Guard mobilized. And there was a discussion between you and Sund leading up to January 6th in which this was discussed, and you didn't get a clear direction to have them mobilized. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. So I talked to Chief Sund on Sunday. I talked to him Saturday and Sunday. We talk. We're friends. Mm-hmm. I've known him for a long time. So on Sunday, I asked him, are you going to request D.C. National Guard help? And if you do, I need it in writing. It has to be formal because the Secretary of Defense has to approve it. He told me he was not allowed to request the support. And I asked him if he wanted me to share that. And he said, no, I can't even ask you for the support, is what he told me. Mm-hmm. But he did say, but if I do call you, will you be able to support me? I said, yes, but I have to get approval from the Secretary of the Army and ultimately the Secretary of Defense because it's a federal request.
Exactly. And so as we've heard from
a good Wednesday morning to you, Craig Melvin here from MSNBC World Headquarters. We have been following that Senate hearing into the January 6th insurrection. A few big takeaways so far. According to the commanding general, approval for the Capitol Police's request for the Guard's deployment did not come from the Defense Department until more than 3 hours after the initial request. That's the top headline right now. We're going to shift gears for a moment and take you to the White House COVID-19 response team's briefing. This briefing coming just hours after the Biden administration announced there will be enough vaccines for every American adult by the end of May. This briefing is just getting started. There's Andy Slavitt there. Let's listen in.
Transfer the vaccine from drug manufacturing plants into the little vials that are shipped all over the country, a process called fill and finish. Using the Defense Production Act, the Biden administration agreed to initial investment of more than $100 million that will help expand the drug substance manufacturing and convert a Merck plant to perform the fill and finish production for the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. With the encouragement and support of the administration, Johnson & Johnson and its manufacturing partners agreed to take several steps to increase production of the vaccine in the U.S. They're now operating 24/7 across facilities to maximize production output. At the direction of the president, the Department of Defense is providing daily logistical support. And the administration employed a team of global experts and equipment manufacturers to support faster ramp-up across all facilities. I want to be clear. Both of these companies, Johnson & Johnson and Merck, deserve credit for this approach. They have stepped up as good corporate citizens with the spirit of cooperation that the president has called for during this crisis. Thanks to everyone's collective actions, we're now on track not only to catch up, but to have enough vaccine supply for every American adult by the end of May. And over the course of the year, these actions will double Johnson & Johnson's U.S. capacity to produce drug substance and increase the U.S. capacity for fill and finish. Finally, I want to credit the execution of the men and women in government and the private sector who came together to work as a team to move this vaccine so rapidly from authorization into arms with incredible efficiency. This vaccine was approved on Saturday. The CDC reviewed it on Sunday. The same day, vaccines were packed and shipped from J&J facilities. Monday, the vaccines arrived at UPS and FedEx hubs and were delivered to vaccination sites so that yesterday, Tuesday, the first vaccines were administered in states across the country. Now, Johnson & Johnson and Merck are not the only ones, and they're not the only businesses stepping up. As I highlighted last Friday, U.S. companies are stepping up to help the country lead its way out of this crisis. And this leads me to highlight a second announcement from this morning aimed at improving the equitable distribution of vaccines. Today, more than a dozen of America's leading health insurance providers announced a new pilot program to get 2 million of the most vulnerable seniors vaccinated as fast as possible. Called the Vaccine Community Connectors Pilot, the aim is to help vulnerable seniors overcome 3 of the most challenging current barriers: questions about the vaccine, scheduling, and transportation. Health plans will make outbound calls to unvaccinated Americans of over 65 who live in areas of high social vulnerability. They'll talk to them about vaccine efficacy, safety, and the value of vaccinations. Then they will facilitate vaccine registration and appointment scheduling for seniors. They'll arrange transportation to and from a vaccination site and ensure seniors get back for a second shot. They'll also look to deploy mobile vans into communities of need. Their goal, again, is to get 2 million of the most vulnerable seniors vaccinated as soon as possible. This commitment came from organizations who have the call centers, technology, and community relationships to run a pilot program like this, and it comes on the heels of our call to action last week to the private sector to use their talents and resources to help bring a quicker end to this crisis. With that, I will turn it over to Dr. Walensky and then to Dr. Fauci.
This pilot program that they're talking about is prioritizing towards senior citizens, the most vulnerable. And I give them 2 thumbs up in what they're doing here, because they have finally driven this coronavirus off into a corner to the point that now, instead of it controlling us, maybe there's a possibility that we can control it. There's still a lot of barriers. There's still a lot of hurdles to have to go over. But this I do know. Saturday, while the prior president of the United States, Donald John Trump, was speaking in Orlando, Florida, wanted to take the credit of this particular event that's happening now as if it was happening on his watch back then. What happened on his watch was total chaos and denial. That's what happened on Donald John Trump's administration watch. And if people are not capable of either accepting that or interpreting that towards it being the reality, then something obviously is wrong with the people who are trying to do the interpreting. Just like going back with the insurrection, January the 6th. If people cannot identify and interpret the true perpetrator that was bringing that on, it's not disheartedly in the reality towards what actually happened, but it is the interpreter or the viewer that isn't interpreting it correctly. Whenever you have a group of people that have become so blinded, such as what we're seeing here in America, first of all, it's very, very dangerous. And second of all, just as the Word of God says that if the blind lead the blind shall also leadeth off into the ditch. And that's exactly where Donald Trump was leading people. He was leading them into darkness. He was leading them off into the abyss. He was leading them in the wrong direction. And we see the results because of that. Just like we see the results that if the National Guard would have got to the Capitol building 2 to 3 hours earlier, it could have possibly prevented from people either losing their eyesight or being stomped to death or officers being killed. It could have led to a different performance that would have led to a different end event. We must, as a society, has to stop avoiding the truth, overlooking the truth, shadowing the truth, and start acknowledging the truth and taking the lies and the deception of the lies and putting them in the right perspective of where they should have been years and years ago. If we're going to survive as a surviving society here up onto the planet, we have to quit playing games with ourselves, and we have to quit playing games with each other. And we have to become, as my grandfather used to say, you have to be a straight shooter. You have to become a straight shooter. As hard as it may sound, you have to call it like it is. If it looks like a duck, sounds like a duck, walks like a duck, odds are it's going to be a duck, son. Now, you can try to shadow it. You can try to defame it. You can try to manipulate it. You can try to disorient it. You can try to taint it in any form or fashion that you want to do. But the bottom line is this: if it looks like a duck, walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, it's a duck. It's a duck. Let's not forget that. That's the difference in two different groups of people. One group of people is being led by the influences of darkness, and the other group of people is being led by the influence of light. Those who are being led by the influence of light can determine the difference between what's a lie and what's the truth. To where those that's still in the darkness, they don't realize that they themselves have been bamboozled, have been bewitched. And the bad thing about them being bewitched is that they're trying to steadily convince us that we're the ones that's wrong and they're the ones that's right. We know what happened January the 6th, and we know why it happened. God bless the people that's working in these response teams pertaining to this coronavirus, this COVID-19, that are now looking at this through a pilot procedure program of being able to justifiably prioritize who needs the vaccination shot on the front end versus who needs it on the back end. God bless them, and 2 thumbs up to them. And this ain't got nothing to do with Donald John Trump. And if somebody tries to convince you that it's got something to do with Donald John Trump, you tell them that they're a bald-faced liar. Because this is the proceedings of the new administration from the Biden and the Harrison administration that has finally stepped up to the plate pertaining to accountability issues and said, this is what we're going to do for the American people. We're going to try to corner this thing to the point, instead of it controlling us, we're going to control it. That's the difference in the 2 different administrations. One is accountable, standing up to the plate towards being led into accountability, while the other is in la-la land. That's still trying to drive everybody else off into the same la-la land that they're driven off into. One thing I can say about President Biden, whenever he said, after he got elected, that democracy has won. We have won the first greatest battle. The war has not yet been won, pertaining to democracy all over the world and ending communism and unjust rule. But this is just one more stair step that leads not just the American people, but leads the Christian society in understanding the very exact same thing whenever Prophet Moses kept going to the Egyptian Pharaoh, telling him to let my people go. This seed of democracy began in that movement, in that Christian society movement of let my people go. And what happened with the Biden administration is another 2 thumbs up, that even though we come close of losing our democracy, we won that battle that day. Simply because the hand of God was upon us. Because if it wasn't upon us, we could have seen that event turn into something such as we have never seen here in the United States pertaining to our own liberty and our own democracy. This is worse. And I keep saying this, and I'm going to end. This is worse than having to defeat your enemy across the pond. And I'm going to tell you why it's worse. Whenever you have an adversary, such as the jihad movement, such as the Arab Spring movement, such as the Taliban movement, such as the I don't forgot now the name of the movement pertaining to the Arab movement. Whenever you have these type of movements that have wanted to dominate and dictate not just their own properties, but wanted to dictate and dominate Israel, Jerusalem, and the American people. And once you realize that this enemy is out to kill, steal, and destroy, which the Bible talks about, you tend to expect this out of your enemy. You tend to expect this out of the Sharia law. You tend to expect this out of the Taliban and other internationally known terrorists that are working in unison towards trying to destroy democracy. But when you have something like this going on within your own ranks, within your own state, within your own society, within your own government, it becomes triple times more dangerous than what you could ever imagine pertaining to your enemy across the pond. And you may be saying, well, why is that? Why is that, Juby? Why is that? Why is that so? Because whenever you have such of a displacency within your own ranks, to the point that you can no longer trust those who you have put in charge of doing their jobs that obviously they didn't do in regards towards dereliction of duty. And I keep saying this to the Weakley County authorities up here in Weakley County towards how that they neglected to do what they should have done in regards to my brother and I that kept going to court, that kept crying out to the law enforcement in this county pertaining to the local sheriff's office, kept calling again and again, help, we need help down here. But never could get none in regards towards dereliction of duty. Whenever you have a group of people that you have hired, that you have put in a certain position, that you expect to do the right thing pertaining to justice, and they do not do the right thing, that gives the other party a license to continue to do what they're doing. This has led into this January the 6th, as well as the coronavirus. And hopefully this administration that we're looking at is smart enough, wise enough, and clear-minded enough that they'll be able to recognize this and to be able to siphon through this in prioritizing what we need to do, how we need to do it, and basically how we need to clean house. Now, granted, Donald John Trump's theology pertaining to his wording was correct. There are certain elements in the government party that is, in fact, rigged, tainted. The swamp, like he said on the front end of his running for president in 2016, that the swamp needed to be drained, theoretically speaking, was correct. But Donald Trump himself, after talking about the swamp, become one of the swamp creatures himself, to the point that now, there at the end of his presidency, wanted to dictate and dominate to the rest of the swamp creatures to become like he was, to support the things that he believed in, even though the facts ruled against his favor. I just pray that the administration that's in power will continue on the same path that they're on, in bringing priority elements to the table, to the round table, and discovering the things that we need to do, as well as the things that we don't need to no longer do, towards driving us, getting us, sailing us out of the stormy waters back into the sunlight. Thanks again to my viewers. Good luck to all of us. And I hope that some of the material that we have gracefully, gratefully gotten out to the general public. And once more, we want to thank those who have allowed for us to become part of your lives. We just hope and pray that some of this, or maybe all of this, will sink in. Will sink in to the degree of making us all become a much longer, stronger, productive citizens to society, to where we can add to the compliments of bettering the world and not worsening it. I'm going to say it one more time. to where we can add to the world towards bettering society and not worsening it. Thank you. God bless you. God bless America. And good luck to each and every one of us. And shalom.